Welcome back to On Texas Football. I'm Jeff Howe, joined by Gerry Hamilton and CJ Vogel. Time for this week's edition of the Recruiting Breakdown. And Gerry, the Recruiting Breakdown is always brought to you by Texas alum Mark Saunders. Let him know about him.
He's the only insurance agent you'll need. I'm just telling you, that's Texas Allstate agent Mark Saunders. He serves the Austin and Round Rock area and the entire state of Texas. That's everything from your home, car, and boat to your motorcycle, RV, and ATV, and anything else you got, too. That's Texas alum and Texas Allstate agent Mark Saunders. Call his office today, 512-218-8571. With more than 35 years of experience, he's easily the guy to call. That's Texas alum Mark Saunders.
Gerry, I don't know if Texas recruiting is in good hands right now, but I guess we'll see by the end of the week where it lies. CJ and I broke this down on Longhorn Weekly earlier this week, so I want to get your 30,000-foot view of the decisions to come this week. There's a lot going on with Kendall Gerville that broke Monday afternoon into Monday night, but several decisions to go this week. Where do you see things standing for Texas right now?
I think the biggest thing is Texas needs to have a good week. And I know that's you're stating the obvious, but after last week, yes. And there's a lot of people say, well, Texas went 0 for 6. To me, it was more 0 for 3.5 because they didn't match on some deals that got pushed through. Malachi Lee, certainly. Xavier Crowell, certainly. James Johnson, certainly. This week, you have to rebound, and you have to win some of these battles where you lead or have led. And yesterday was a rough day on Kendall Gerville because Texas has been out in front on him for a while. Now, he announces tomorrow on the 2nd, but I say it was a rough day because that went from that Gerville and his circle in constant communication with Texas to about 0 in a 24-hour period of time. And then you heard, and it really broke through the people that cover Georgia saying, hey, man, Florida just came big on Gerville. And so people started reporting that. Florida made a huge move for Kendall Gerville yesterday. And I said all that to say this, Texas needs to close out some of these they lead on. So if Texas loses out on Gerville in the second, Trenton Henderson, we didn't expect that one. That's one Texas will hang around the rim. Gerville, too, if that goes Florida's way. Texas will hang around the rim on some of these guys and fight through till senior year. But Trenton Henderson looks all but done to LSU over Florida and Texas. And I do think that helped Florida make the push on Gerville, even though they're different positions. They're still on the defensive front. And Trenton Henderson was the top guy on the defensive line for Florida. And if he goes elsewhere, well, that's a lot of NIL allotment that's then available right now. So I think they all play into each other. Kosuk Paul on the third is one Texas has been a favorite for a while. When Johnny Nansen was hired at Texas, that's the first in-state linebacker he went to see. Yep. And that was when Paula was a sophomore. That's one Texas has been out in front on for a while. Penn State, Baylor, Miami's their competition. Then on the fourth, look, if there's a must-get guy, the must-get recruit was Diabell. If there's a must-get guy not committed right now, it's been John Turntine for me. I think the guy's a great player. We've had him ranked as a 5-star for 2 years now or over a year. I think it's a no-brainer 5-star prospect. He's a guy that's been on campus probably more than any other kid in this cycle for Texas. Has a couple of older sisters that go to college in Austin. Again, Michigan's the competition. A&M, despite we reported it's not looking good for A&M. They're out. They've still continued to try. Stanford's still going to continue to try. It tells you how good he is. That's one Texas needs to win. Then Felix Ojo, we'd hinted it late in the week. We kind of heard through the grapevine. Look, his birthday's July 4th, so he might announce on the 4th. Well, yesterday Ojo came out and said he is announcing on the 4th. Will that be Texas? Will it be Ohio State? A week ago it was down the 2, Texas, Ohio State. Now, puts out his announcement date, and Florida and Michigan are in it with Texas and Ohio State. We still think it's Texas or Ohio State, but look, there's still 3 days until announcement day for him. But that's one Texas has been doing well with. But my thing's always been with him and Turntine is, will they actually commit to the same school? And I'm not saying they will. I'm not saying they won't. But it's something I've been monitoring for a while, and I'll continue to monitor that one. And then there's Caden Finley on the 4th, which we expect that to go to Notre Dame unless it changes in the next 48 hours. So Texas need to win these recruitments they're leading on this week. And the crazy thing about it is through all this turbulence, and it's been a lot of rough waters, whatever you want to call it, winding road. If Texas gets the guys they lead on this week, they're the 6 or 7 ranked recruiting class in the country.
Yeah. Yep.
Even through a rough week last week. So we'll see which way it goes.
CJ, outside of the Kendall Gerville situation, How are you feeling about everything right now relative to when we talked about it earlier in the week as you sit here about 24 hours later? Again, outside of the Graville situation, how are you feeling about everything?
Yeah, I think Gerry hit it, right? It's one of those things that I've said for a while. When you aim big, as Texas has been in 2026 recruiting, and you miss, well, it's going to make a louder sound, right? Big tree fall hard. You're going to hear that tree a little bit harder and a little bit louder when it doesn't go your direction. And that's some of these decisions, right? Xavier Crowell's a big one. I mean, Xavier Griffin, another. You're recruiting 5-star guys, so each one is a significant loss, or it's at least perceived to be. And yes, Texas, maybe it feels like they're not prioritizing a few positions NIL-wise. We talk about wide receiver as one, and I think a lot of folks are wondering, well, if you're not prioritizing that position, or at least maybe not going or matching with some of these other schools, where are those funds going? Well, I think we're going to get an answer once this revenue sharing deal kind of at least is laid out on the table. Now that July 1st is here, we kind of get an idea of what's ahead, what's legal, what's not, what are some of the loopholes that some of these schools might be looking to exploit. We'll see. And I'd be shocked if Texas is not, finding ways come the end of the year to put together a really talented class. They've done it every year that Steve Sarkisian and his staff have been together in Austin. And you got a good base. Again, I've mentioned that throughout the entire month of June. You look at a number of key positions, you got 3 really good defensive linemen in the class. You got 2 really good offensive linemen in the class. Now it's about finding ways to take a good class into a great class. And yes, you got to figure out ways to close on some of these recruitments. You got to find ways to overcome deficits, hold on to leads. That's been a bit of a recurring theme so far, but July should provide its own fireworks. And look, that July 4th day, whether Turntine and Ojo go to the same school or not, Gerry, I think Texas is in a good spot now with a few days to go before July 4th. And you look back at a few cycles. How about this? July 2nd, 2021, you get Connor Robertson and Cole Hudson to commit on July 2nd, same day. You go to 2022, June, 26th, you get Kojo, Connor Stroh, Trevor Gooseby, and Jaden Chapman. Kyle Flood's no stranger to getting a good majority of his offensive linemen to commit on the same day.
And I'll say this, because I think this is one of the big topics. Sark is he is a master at building a script for games. In the first quarter and second quarter on a Saturday, he's tremendous. In recruiting, he's tremendous in the fourth quarter. Just something to remember, and that's been proven out over his time at Texas. Justice Terry, Grayson Littleton, Zealous Hicks, that reclass at the time. There were a number of guys. There were flips in that class too. Dalen McCutcheon, right? Myron Charles, Josiah Sharma. There was a lot that went on in that class to make it the number one class. When the ball was kicked in game one last year, it wasn't number one class.
Yeah.
The important thing for Texas, I think, and why it's important to have a good week is good couple of weeks potentially, is to position yourselves. Even if you're ranked 6, 7, or 8 come the start of the season, you position yourself well again. What you don't want to have happen is have 11 guys you have to try to make ground up on as seniors. You have to win some of these. Then it becomes a lot of work. But if they have a good week and a half on the trail here, and they're going to have the 6th, 7th, 8th ranked class, well, then you're going to look at 4 or 5 guys who they're going to hang around the rim on and really try to fight for. Then you have the news we haven't talked about, Derek Cooper, not announcing July 12th. On Texas Football broke the news yesterday. Hey, look, Texas wants him to come in for a game weekend. Since then, other people have reported on that. He's going to come visit for a game this year. He won't be the only guy. Texas will get other guys similar or guys they really like as seniors, a Grayson Littleton type, on campus during the season. So, but the key is to get in the position yourself to where you don't have to do too much work during the season.
I want to direct the listening and viewing audience as we transition here to Gerry's Monday morning piece over at ontexasfootball.com. We're looking at positional needs for the rest of the class, or where Texas needs to fill holes for the rest of the cycle. And Gerry, I want to start with quarterback. And if we're doing the football game analogy, Texas went out before the ball even got kicked off in this cycle and got their quarterback. They got Dia Bell. And I know both you guys have spent a lot of time around Dia Bell. Gerry, Roger Bell's been on Coffee and Football a few times now. But when, CJ, coming off of your experience at the Manning Passing Academy, being around Cooper Manning, Gerry, and your interaction with Roger Bell, it drives home the point for me that not only is Texas getting recruits and getting prospects from families that have some pro bloodlines and understand what it's like to be a professional. But Gerry, it really seems like Sark and company are targeting the right kind of families that have the proper perspective on their kids and how they're handling things going to Texas.
I think so. And even like KJ Lacey, while he doesn't have a pro athlete dad, his dad was a smaller college basketball player. His high school coach was a NFL, CFL quarterback and a great player at Southern Miss, right? So the quarterbacks at Texas recruiting, I think they're all grounded kids, right? Whether that be from their parents being pro athletes or pro athlete family, or whether it's the high school coach they played for that's been through it as a player at a high level. Manning and KJ Lacey worked with David Morris at QB Country. Again, same thing. Multiple NFL quarterbacks have come through there. So Texas is doing a really good job of that from a quarterback perspective, I think. And I think that plays into the decisions. I really do. I think that helps with the decision. I mean, Rajah Bell's dude, I'm not talking about his net worth, but he's worth $1 million as a recruit dad now. Yes. I mean, he is awesome. He is awesome. He is the undrafted guy that went out and won jobs against guys that were drafted. He has such a great message for his son. He is a professional in his approach to it. So I think Texas has done a great job there at the quarterback position. And again, as long as the quarterback position remains in good hands, I know people that the boat takes on a little water at times in recruiting in the summer, but the program's in really good hands.
CJ, let's move on to running back. Gerry mentioned it. Your take on Derek Cooper and where Texas stands at the running back position right now.
At the very least, it's a positive for Texas. It couldn't have gotten any more negative for Texas, but hey, prolongs his recruitment just to perhaps enough time for him to get to campus. And again, I think Gerry and I have been pretty steadfast on this take until he gets to campus for an official visit, or at least just a trip to Austin. You know, that recruitment remains a bit of a long shot in my eyes. And look, does he get to campus in the duration it takes before he commits? We'll see. Ultimately, Texas is going to push. They've remained in contact. I think this is one that, you know, given the way that running back recruiting has gone today, it's certainly worth Texas returning to Derek Cooper and saying, hey, what about a little trip to Austin, right? So until he gets to campus, I think it's more positives for the Longhorns. But again, that big trip to Austin remains kind of that number one thing on my priority list for Derek Cooper and the Longhorns. But again, more time for Texas to work behind the scenes is always a positive here.
Gerry, with the pool shrinking of running back bodies, we know Texas will continue to recruit Xavier Crowell. We've mentioned Derek Cooper a couple of times already. Is this kind of a default to one-back class, or is that still to be determined?
I think it depends on the seniors they look at in state. And if somebody really senior year catches their eye, or somebody decommits, or recruitment kind of opens back up of guys that committed elsewhere. But I think they would still like it to be a two-person back class. The only caveat to that is what if either Wisner or Baxter, and I say Baxter because if he has a 600-yard season whenever he starts playing again, it's going to be hard for him to stay in college after an injury. If one of those guys comes back, maybe this is the year you take one and set up 27 for 2. I don't think the staff has that answer right now. I think it has to play out during the season.
CJ, let's go to wide receiver. Chris Stewart's been in this class for a minute. He's stayed on Texas. Texas has stayed on him. I know you're a big believer in Cohen Brown. What would you like to see Texas do? Again, let's assume Caden Finley ends up picking Notre Dame on the 4th. What would you like to see Texas do in this class at wide receiver?
Well, personally, and a little selfishly, I'd love to see them pony up for Jalen Lott. You know, I think that would be my first thing, but I think we've all kind of accepted the fact that that's headed out to the West Coast, whether it be Oregon, whether that be USC. It's going to be interesting to see where he goes on the 8th. But I also think in the wide receiver conversation, you have to factor in the possibility of a Jermaine Bishop. And if that's the case, and you end up with a wide receiving core of Cohen Brown, Chris Stewart, and Jermaine Bishop, you've got 3 really talented guys, all with versatile skill sets, all coming in following a 4-receiver class, in which 3 of which were 5-star guys, depending on which recruiting ranking service you go to. So that's going to be tough to also sell to a 4th potential wide receiver in the 26 class, say, all right, we got a spot for you when they look at the depth chart and say, are you sure? So it all depends on what the staff truly envisions Jermaine Bishop being. And right now, that approach as an athlete gives you that two-way go of cornerback or wide receiver. Of course, we saw him take photos with the Thorpe Award. We saw him tagging Mark Orfe in his tweet from his official visit. I still think he'd be a great corner, but it's hard to deny that production at wide receiver is something that would certainly be of value for the Longhorns in his college career.
Gerry,
one prediction I'll make is we won't see Sark and Chris Jackson bring out live goats.
I think we can bank on that pretty much. Gerry, when we look at Jermaine Bishop, I view him through the prism of Ramonce Taylor as a high school recruit, which if you go back to our teaser again, it's been 12 or 20 years now. But if you go back to that recruitment, there was a lot of talk in the Central Texas area about, hey, Dwayne Aquino really likes Ramonce Taylor and wants to make him a corner. But you watch him with the ball in his hands, and I said, nope, I've got to have that guy. That guy's got to have the ball in his hands at the college level. That's how I feel about Jermaine Bishop. He could be a great secondary player, Gerry. But if Jermaine Bishop ends up factoring into the mix at a wide receiver, could that just be the three-man class with Stewart, Brown, and Bishop?
Certainly possible, and it's funny you bring that up. I mean, Ramonce told that story on Coffee and Football this morning about how Texas started him as at defensive back, and they're like, oh, Mac was like, no, we're going to have the ball in this guy's hands, and then they moved him to the running back and receiver. And I do see Jermaine Bishop similar. I'm with CJ. Look, I think he's one of those prospects that can be equally as good on either side of the ball. But does Sark see a little Xavier Worthy in him?
Yeah.
I tend to think he might. And so that, I think, could lead down that path of being a wide receiver because he's got that wiry body, but whatever his weight is, he plays a lot more physical than that, and he has got elite playmaking ability with elite. We should just call him a Tesla. His 0 to 60 is very, very, very fast.
Gerry, you mentioned Tesla. That's as good a segment as any because if you've got a Tesla, whatever car you're driving, you need to make sure that thing's insured properly. That's why you need to get in touch with Texas alum Mark Saunders.
Absolutely. Mark Saunders, he's the only insurance agent you'll need as serving the Austin and Round Rock area and all of Texas. Everything from your home, car, and boat to your motorcycle, RV, and ATV. Call Texas Allstate agent Mark Saunders' office today at 512-218-8571. Here is the On Texas Football personal guarantee from myself, Jeff Howe, and CJ Vogel. With more than 35 years of experience, you'll be in great hands with Texas alum Mark Saunders. Give him a call today, 512-218-8571.
As we go to tight end, Gerry, we're a little bit of ways out, about 10, 11 days away from Hezi Kent making his decision. When you look at tight end, Texas doesn't have one committed right now. We know Keawe Brown out of Corona Centennial is still out there. But, Gerry, that Hezi Kent decision, you've mentioned it, Texas can legitimately sell him on playing tight end in this offense. And you said it when you went out there to see him. He really likes Texas.
He does. I just wonder if Texas has the highest NIL out there for him. I've heard they may not. So what is going to become of that? I do think Hezi Kent really likes the idea of playing at Texas. But as we've learned in this cycle, that doesn't mean somebody can't value him from an NIL perspective at a higher number. Then kids have tough decisions to make, right? Because that's a family decision at that point. So then Keawe Brown, because Caden Prothro, I think that'd be a major upset if he went Texas way. Obviously, Georgia's the heavy favorite there ahead of his July 12th decision. Keawe Brown, CJ, I mean, look, that's one where I think that's a Texas lean, but how hard is Texas pushing early on right now headed into July?
Yeah, I think that's the question to ask for Keawe Brown is, look, I think Texas would have landed that recruitment in late last couple of days of June had they pushed for it after his official visit, and yet he delayed his recruitment quite a while. To me, it feels like he's waiting on decisions of perhaps a Hezi Kent, perhaps a Caden Prothro, and that's what Texas is kind of, in my eyes, waiting to see as well. But Texas remains in a good spot, and I believe, if I remember correctly, Gerry, Texas was the only official visit that Keawe Brown took in the month of June. So that kind of tells you where his interest level is. Given the green light from the staff, I think he'd absolutely be a member of this class.
The tight end position, though, guys, real quick, Gerry, you can take this if you want, or CJ, you can take it. I love the upside in the future of this position, especially with the buffer you get now with Jack injuries to get a veteran presence in there for this year. But another year for Jordan Washington to grow, another year for Nick Townsend to grow. Emory Winston has his role. Gerry, I know there's positions in this program that have a lot of upside. I'm not sure there's one that's got quite the ceiling that tight end does when you look at the legitimate NFL prospects in that room.
I agree. And look, y'all know where I come out on Nick Townsend. I think he may end up being the best height, weight, speed ratio prospect Texas has had tight end in my years doing this. And that's saying something because Jermichael Finley was a hell of an athlete. But I just think Nick Townsend's a little different. And Jordan Washington's got a chance. He just missed a spring. Emory Winston's got a tremendous pair of mitts. You don't want to play him in ping pong. But a tremendous pair of mitts. Spencer Shannon's got his in-line capabilities. And then there's injuries. Is he a one-year player? Is he a two-year player? Texas has tight end position while they need some experience on the field behind injuries. Their talent level is at a really high spot right now.
Yeah, it seems like everybody's starting to figure out what Jatavian Sanders and then Gunnar Helm have done. Texas is in a really good spot with tight end going forward. Guys, is there anything else you want to touch on the offensive line? We've already talked about John Turntine and Felix Ojo, their upcoming decisions. This is a class with Max Wright and Nicholas Robertson. Gerry, what's the O-line outlook right now?
Need 2 more tackles in this class, bottom line. They are strong on the interior. They have great depth. They have really good young players, Texas and center. Texas needs to hit on 2 more tackles in this class. That's the main thing for me.
Do you think, Gerry, do they need a kid in this class with the potential to play center, or are they Kyle Fledge is pretty set with Daniel Cruz is, for all intents and purposes, his center for the future?
Well, Devin Coleman was recruited as a center/guard that'll play out over time. Jordan Coleman was recruited as a guard/right tackle leaning to guard. So I think center, it has some depth at Texas right now, especially if Devin Coleman ends up playing there long term.
All right, let's go to the other side of the ball. Let's go interior defensive line. Texas with 3 committed right now, coming off of Vodney Cleveland, picking the Longhorns. We talked a lot about Kendall Graville. Gerry, whatever Kendall Graville decides, if you're Kenny Baker, do you just recruit Kendall Graville and James Johnson through the whistle? And if you flip one, great. If not, what do you do?
No, I think there's Jamion Winfield. I think there's more guys too to this. Jamion Winfield, the USC commit at Richardson. I think there's a number of guys that Texas will stay on senior season in the interior defensive line if Graville does in fact go to Florida. There is literally, I would say, 0 chance you don't see a couple of defensive linemen committed elsewhere show up for Texas games this season.
CJ, Jamarian Carlton's the next edge guy that's going to announce a decision. Where do you feel things sit right now? Not just with Carlton, but with that edge room right now after Richard Wesley's recent commitment.
Yeah, of course, the big one is Trenton Henderson, who we're expected to decide between LSU and Florida. Texas in the top 3, but we don't expect that to be the decision from Henderson later on this week. But that leaves Jamarian Carlton. And look, Baylor is the one that I'm keeping a very close eye on. He took his official visit to the Baylor Bears June 20th. And right now, that Baylor's being very competitive. I don't think it's been talked about a lot because Texas going nationally, not recruiting as much against Big 12 schools at the moment. But Baylor's very competitive on the NIL market this cycle. I think that's maybe catching a lot of teams by surprise. It'll be really interesting to see if that's a factor for Carlton and Texas, because it's been kind of a rocky road to get to this point with Carlton and Texas, right? There was a time in which he had 6 official visits and none of them, or not a single one of them, was to Austin. So Baylor's been around in this one. Baylor's a team to watch as well. But if Texas pushes hard for that decision July 10th, it'll be very hard in my eyes for the Longhorns to not end up with a positive recruitment win on the trail for Carlton.
Gerry, you mentioned edge, probably a 2-man class for Texas with a third as a swing guy. You still feel that's what we're looking at here?
I think the swing guys kind of with the Richard Wesley commitment to Texas, I think that even though he's not technically a swing guy, he is a bigger body guy and is going to be, I think that may have knocked out a Bryce Perry Wright potential. We'll see on that. But I'm not feeling that one right now. So it looks more and more like a 2-edge class. Let's just say if they got Carlton, it could still turn to 3 because nobody's walking away from Trenton Henderson.
Yeah.
Texas will not stop recruiting Trenton Henderson.
CJ, considering Texas does not have a linebacker committed right now, we talk about these decisions this week. Should we be talking more about Kosi Okpala's decision on Thursday that's when Texas really needs to get across the finish line, not just because he's a talented player, but just to get yourself on the board at linebacker.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we talked about it. Texas took 5 linebacker official visits in the month of June, all of them in the top 250. So you're aiming very high at the linebacking spot. What's going to be interesting again is, look, Kosi Okpala, Gerry mentioned earlier, that was the first guy that Johnny Nansen went out to see in this cycle, right? He's been a priority for quite a while. He made back-to-back weekend trips to Austin in the spring, and it felt like things were certainly moving in the right direction at the time. I will say, and Jeff, we've talked about this, when certain schools are recruiting certain positions with certain skill sets, your ears start to perk up a little bit. And that's Penn State with those kind of hybrid edge linebacking guys, right? And so we'll see if, obviously, what kind of push Penn State's able to make. But ultimately, I think Texas is the leader there. And again, at linebacker, well, you got 5 on the board, all of which outside of Calvin Thomas and Kosi Okpala are out of state. Yet, to me, Calvin Thomas, who we don't believe will be headed to Texas, is off to Nebraska. And it makes for Kosi Okpala to be that big-time land on the in-state this year to at least get the ball rolling at the position.
Gerry, you mentioned 3 as the number. Are there 3 realistic targets for Texas right now? And if not, is this kind of like running back where you may just be going into the fall leaning on senior evals?
Yeah, look, Texas would have to hit it out of the park here. I mean, they'd have to win out for Okpala. They'd have to get Tyler Atkinson, and then they'd have to upset Tennessee for Braden Rouse. That seems a bit unlikely to me, but we'll see what happens. I mean, look, because the reality is Atkinson's been a Georgia lean, but getting him on campus, there's some things there with Texas. We'll see what happens. Braden Rouse has been a Tennessee lean since the start of this process, and we know CJ talked to him. He'd be a tremendous fit at Texas. The kid probably sees that, but that's still a long way from telling Tennessee no when they were the last OV. He's been up there probably more than anywhere else he's been outside of the state of Georgia. That's a pretty big ask because Texas has not been recruiting him 2 years like Tennessee has. So that Texas would have to go 3 for 3 in that scenario. So what you're hoping for, I think, if you're Johnny Nansen and Sark, is you close Okpala, you win out for one of the 2 Georgia kids, and that leaves you with 1 spot. Texas is all in on Atkinson. Georgia's really going to have to earn it.
Let's go to defensive back. Let's stay out of state because Samari Matthews is a guy that Texas had high on the board for a long time. They've been right there at the top. It's a Texas-South Carolina battle. Gerry, is this in your category of one that Texas really needs to finish strong with, and a kid that they've been in a great position with, but you got to break the tape on this deal?
Yeah. I think CJ would. Smoke Matthews is a guy, or Samari Matthews is a guy that Texas is. Mark Orfe's done a good job on him, right? And you kind of wondered who was the competition going to be. Once Clemson dropped off, it looked like Miami, but then that South Carolina last OV's always been out there. And the defensive back recruiters at South Carolina, I think, are really good, maybe the strength of their staff. And that's not a far drive from Charlotte, North Carolina. So that's always been the battle there for Texas. And, it's our last week, start of the week, CJ, we heard more about South Carolina. Later in the week, there's a little more Texas chatter. Now, that's still 10 days out. But that's one Texas, I think, absolutely needs to win and see where the chips fall for Devon Benjamin, who's an Oregon lean, who Texas is very high on.
If that's the case where Samari Matthews does end up at Texas, look, you're looking at a case where Texas landed its top 2 cornerback picks on the board. And I know that we've talked about the way that recruiting at times feels like it runs in droughts. Well, for Mark Orfe in his first cycle at Texas, if Samari Matthews ends up in the class, I would say that's a pretty successful run with Hayward Howard Jr. and Samari Matthews as your 2 cornerbacks in this cycle.
Gerry, let's assume for a minute that Jermaine Bishop ends up being an offensive player. Actually, let's just say he's the wild card at this point. Do you like what's potentially out there for Texas to add another receiver or to maybe go out and add another defensive back?
I would say defensive back. That's kind of where I lean on that is now there's a lot of depth at receiver in the state of Texas. There could be a guy pop up as a senior. You got to remember Texas offered the kid at Kaufman, then he committed Azure Miles, but then he committed to SMU. There's a lot of talent in state at wide receiver, but I think with Orfe's ties, recruiting ties around the Southeast, especially Florida, They went to see 2 or 3 kids down there that never really were publicized because Texas didn't really extend real offers to them. Be interesting to see, but I tend to think it's defensive back.
All right, Gerry, CJ, thank you guys for the knowledge and expertise. As always, thank you to Matthew behind the scenes for producing it and the entire On Texas Football staff. If you're not a member over at ontexasfootball.com, you want to get stuff like this from Gerry, CJ, Bobby, myself, Blake. We have everything you can want: football, recruiting, team news, notes and nuggets, portal, baseball, portal, basketball. Get over there right now. Use the promo code OTFOG when you sign up. That'll get you 1 year of access for $39.95 over at ontexasfootball.com. Become an OTFOG today. That's your promo code OTFOG for 1 year of access for $39.95. For Gerry and CJ and Matthew behind the scenes and the entire On Texas Football staff, I'm Jeff Howe. Thank you so much for watching and listening. And until next time, hook 'em.